When you look at this phenomena of internet extremism, and you inquire into this movement of using social media as a means of inculcating and spreading very dangerous ideas like eugenics and Darwinism and nativism, one thing that you will find in this movement is that the people who are doing these things, they are looking in the long term, right? They're working for the long haul, for the long run. They understand that in order to fulfill their aspirations, they have to work incrementally. They have to work in increments. And so they understand that their aspirations aren't going to be completely fulfilled in the next 3 years, 4 years. They're thinking in terms of decades. And so currently, they are simply working on one very simple idea, right? One very effective strategy, and that is simply expanding the Overton window. That is what they are focusing on. Andrew Marantz, who is a journalist for The New Yorker, he has spent years researching the alt-right and researching the phenomena and resurgence of nationalism in the United States and also in Europe, but mainly in the United States. And he talks a lot about how these activists are fixated on the idea of simply expanding the Overton window, right? So what is the Overton window? The Overton window is a concept. So here's the window, right? It's an oval-shaped window, but it's a window. Here's the Overton window. Anything inside of the Overton window is acceptable speech, right? Anything inside the Overton window is acceptable speech. So, for example, if I talk about the dangers of Russia and why the United States must work hard to aid and protect our allies who are resisting Russian expansionism and encroachment, that is considered acceptable speech, right? No one gets shocked by that. If I make a movie about Russians working with, not Russians. If I make a movie about Americans working with Afghan resistance fighters, Afghan freedom fighters, to fight against Russian colonialism or Soviet colonialism, right? There's nothing taboo about that. There's nothing unacceptable about that. No one in America is shocked by that. If I make a film about American soldiers fighting Nazis in World War II, no one is shocked by that, although, maybe the Germans are secretly upset about that. No one is shocked by it, and people generally don't object to things like that because it is within the Overton window. It is within the realm of acceptable speech, mannerisms, and actions. If I make a video game about Americans fighting Nazis or fighting Russians or fighting Russian terrorists or drug cartels in Mexico, no one is really shocked by that because it is within the Overton window. And even if you don't understand or don't even know about the Overton window, the concept of the Overton window, you still subconsciously understand that there is something called acceptable speech. It's ingrained within all of us because human beings are naturally collective. We are designed to be collective. We are designed to be communitarian. And so we have taboos, we have standards, we have things that are normalized, we have normalization, and we have things that you don't talk about, things that you don't bring up, things that are considered to be egregious, certain types of speech that are considered to be offensive or just plain evil. And this is a good thing that we have this, right? Because there's certain things that we should not talk about, or there are certain things that we should not talk light of. There are certain things that we should not speak positively about, because there is evil, and we should not speak positively about evil. Now, if I make a video game in which you play an SS commander and you have to kill American soldiers, what then happens? there is outrage, right? Because the Nazis were evil, and so why are we playing Nazis killing American troops? That is considered to be outside of the Overton window. But what would happen if, let's say, we make a video game about a Nazi soldier killing Americans, right? And you have to play this Nazi soldier, and you're fighting Americans, and maybe there's one part of the game that is especially shocking because you have to kill American POWs, or you have to fight and kill French resistance fighters. What then happens? There is outrage, but at the same time, you will have debate, because in the video game world, you will find a lot of people who are striving to expand that Overton window. That's why, when you talk about controversy and video games, you will see that there is a lot of racist insults that are made in online gaming. Just look at the whole controversy of Gamergate. And a lot of gamers would say, yeah, that's really cool. Of course, you'll have people who would say, no, this is wrong. People in the general public would, if asked, say that they are against such a game. But people in the gaming world would be a lot of people in the gaming world would probably be more outraged by the objections to such a game than the game itself. And the game would come out, and a lot of people would play it because of the controversy. But what would happen in that instance? What would happen in that certain situation? The Overton window would be expanded. Now we have a video game in which you can play a Nazi killing Americans. Now in this hypothetical, now that this video game is accepted, or has become popular enough that maybe other game designers would think about making a game similar to it to get the controversy and the attention. Now the Overton window has been expanded by a little bit, right? By a little bit, because still people would find it disturbing, but you would have enough people who would find it acceptable, or who would find it as something exciting. And that small amount of people would be expanding that Overton window by a half an inch or so. And a half an inch is still a half an inch. It's still an expansion nonetheless. It's an incremental expansion, but an expansion regardless. And to the minds of such activists, it is a small victory. Now, in this hypothetical world, let's say that another game company comes around and makes a game in which you play a Nazi SS officer, and in most of the game you're fighting Americans and Russians, but there is this one level in the game where you have to kill concentration camp victims, concentration camp prisoners, and you have to kill French resistance fighters or communists, right? They won't put Jews because that's way too inflammatory, but you can kill commies, and you can kill French communist resistance fighters. Now what? There would be outrage, of course, but that Overton window would be expanded nonetheless. The video gamers who love such freaky things, or such toxic things, they would be laughing at the objectors and calling them SJW snowflakes and all that. And that Overton window would be expanded. And pretty soon, then, you would have a video game in which you just straight up kill Jews and handicaps and innocent victims. And it would be like, well, it's part of history. So we're simply portraying history. That's all we're doing. That Overton window would be expanded. The people who are going on social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and now things like 4chan, Reddit, they are using these platforms as a means to an end. And the end is to expand that Overton window to the point where things like blatant eugenics and Darwinism are acceptable speech. So that Overton window is, here it is, and everything within it. This is acceptable speech. Here's all the extremes, right? Support for communism, support for eugenics, support for nativism, support for Darwinism. It's all outside, right? Open support. We still have Darwinism, right? And even in this Overton window, we still have some acceptable forms of Darwinism, like euthanasia and abortion. Although we don't call it social Darwinism, it does fall quite conveniently into the hands of those who do want to expand things like social Darwinism. Things like CRISPR and genetic editing, and doing editing on embryos as a way, or killing embryos because they have certain defects or certain handicaps. That is actually already within our Overton window. Now, at one point in time, it was considered to be immoral, but people like Margaret Sanger and others, their activism was effective enough that the Overton window has expanded to the point where we consider infanticide as acceptable. So, is it possible for the Overton window to be expanded to the point where we will go a step above abortion and start killing people because they are handicapped? People who are already born because they are handicapped, or because they are retarded, or because their eye color is not what we like. It's very possible, because that Overton window has been expanded to the point where we can talk about what's happening in Iceland, where the majority of children with Down syndrome have been murdered in the womb, and we could congratulate Iceland for that, and that congratulations would be accepted by enough people to the point that outrage to your congratulations would, it'll be accepted maybe by evangelicals or Catholics, but most people wouldn't care. So how are we seeing this, Overton window being expanded? We are seeing a resurgence of things like nativism. And people who are pushing nativism are working to expand that Overton window. I want to give you guys some examples here. So Tucker Carlson, right? So you had Bill O'Reilly, and Bill O'Reilly was pretty much a standard conservative, right? He was the textbook American conservative. And he was replaced by Tucker Carlson. Now, was this a part of some sort of right-wing agenda? I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. But that's what happened. He was replaced. And now Tucker Carlson has been using his platform to push for nativist ideas. Now, he isn't saying blatantly that, certain people are inferior. But he is saying certain things that, because now they're so acceptable by a large amount of the population, it's considered to be acceptable within, the conservative strata. So, for example, here are some quotes from Tucker Carlson. Quote, "Virginia has transformed politically because it has been transformed demographically." And he said this in November of 2017. Transformed demographically. And this is like hand in glove in alt-right rhetoric. Hand in glove, right? This is essential prerequisite alt-right rhetoric. Demographics have changed. This is terrible for us. Here you have a reporter on Fox News, a major news outlet, talking like a nativist. Again, the Overton window is being expanded. Tucker Carlson, the most popular cable anchor in his time slot, said in November of 2017, quote, 12% of Virginia is foreign-born, and that has made all the difference. They've replaced you. Replaced you? That's reminiscent to what they were saying in Charlottesville, the Tiki Torch rally. You will not replace us. Or it's also reminiscent to the typical European right-wing identitarian saying of the Great Replacement, that native Europeans are being replaced, and that it's part of this conspiracy of the Great Replacement in which non-whites are replacing native Europeans. This propaganda is very effective in recruiting people, because if you want people to join your movement, you have to make them believe or get them to believe that they are in existential danger. This is a very effective means to this end. Even people like Laura Ingraham have participated in this type of speech. So, for example, Laura Ingraham said, quote, "The Democrats mostly want to replace those old white Yahoo conservatives with a new group of people who might be a little bit more amenable to big government." Those non-whites, man, they're going to destroy our political infrastructure. That's what this is about. It's about causing this, or sparking immigration hysteria. And here's the thing. Once that Overton window is expanded, even if it's by a half an inch, a quarter, a third of an inch, it's still been expanded. And once you go past that, once one extreme becomes generally acceptable, be it amongst left-wingers or right-wingers, it doesn't matter, it's acceptable. And it's going to take something very, very drastic to get people to snap out of it. Kind of like Germany and the Second World War. The Germans were so crazy that, or they went past that Overton window so excessively that they only really snapped out of it once they got their asses kicked in a war. And even then, a lot of people still accepted it in secret. And people in Germany, a lot of them today, still accept these things in secret. And what's happening in Germany is that anti-immigrant language has become so common that it's becoming acceptable, to the point that now one of the biggest parties in Germany is a Nazi party. Not openly Nazi, but implicitly Nazi, Alternative for Deutschland party. So that's really what this is about. It's about expanding that Overton window to the point where it becomes very difficult to extirpate or to purge that sort of language from society. It becomes very difficult to persuade people that it's wrong because it becomes acceptable. It's like that bishop, what's his name, from Nigeria, I forgot his name. Cardinal Sarah, that's his name. So Cardinal Sarah, I remember, was it last year or back in 2018, he did a talk or an interview in which he said that God created certain people to live in certain geographic locations. And conservative Catholics were like, oh, that's fine. And I'm sitting there like, wait a second. God created certain people to live in certain places. It was this implicit form of anti-immigration rhetoric. It was very, very strange. It's like, so Africans belong in Africa, white people belong in Europe, Asians belong in Asia. Like, it was very, very strange. It was very surreal to hear that sort of rhetoric coming from a Catholic cardinal. Or for example, when Donald Trump talks about, Mexico isn't sending its best, Mexico's sending its worst, and all that, and then he had that legal battle, and the judge that was overseeing that legal situation was a Mexican American, but he was born, I think, in Ohio, and Donald Trump was like, I don't want this judge to oversee the legal situation because he's a Mexican. And he said this in an interview, and the interviewer was like, wait a second, Donald, he's American. He was born in the U.S. And Trump was like, he's a Mexican. And then later on, he was like, well, he's part of La Raza. Now, if he would have just said, well, he's La Raza, and I think he would have a bias against me, that would be something else. But because Trump said he's a Mexican, and then he emphasized again, he's a Mexican, and the fact that conservatives just accepted that as something, as great, as something that's completely acceptable, the fact that they tolerated that really revealed the underlying nefarious nature of this way of thinking. So, yeah, it's about expanding that Overton window. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.